true active listening is when you are fully present, when you are not thinking about what you have to do for dinner or that to-do list or whatever it is that's coming up tomorrow. And on top of that, you have set all of your values, your beliefs, and your opinions aside for this other person to essentially take up space where you normally take up space internally.
Welcome to Prevention Leaders Podcast with Dave Closson, your source for insights into the world of substance misuse prevention. Each episode, Dave brings you the latest strategies, expert discussions, and real-life success stories designed to empower your work and inspire impactful change. Whether you're a prevention professional, community advocate, or simply passionate about making a difference, this podcast will keep you informed and motivated. Get ready to lead with a confidence that drives lasting results. Let's lead the change together.
There's a moment. Have you ever sat with someone in pain, someone teetering between hope and despair, when words become fragile, too soft and they drift away, too harsh and they can close the door completely? To quote Susie Reece, they hit hard because in our line of work in prevention, our greatest tool isn't a program or a checklist. It's how we communicate, how we listen, and how we reflect, how we connect. Today, I'm thrilled to welcome back Susie Reece, a communication expert, trainer, and passionate voice in suicide and substance use prevention. And I'll be honest with you, this conversation left me reflecting on every email I've sent, every training I've delivered, and every time I thought I was being present, but maybe I wasn't. So let's talk about communication, not just as a skill, but as a lifeline.
One of my fun little practice stories is when I was a corrections officer, midnight shift, I would read the book Verbal Judo. And then, bad joke, I had a captive audience to practice on. When I would make rounds and I would know who was going to give me trouble, and I would read a chapter and, all right, let's go practice.
Yep, I really did that. I had a copy of Verbal Judo in a hallway full of folks who couldn't go anywhere. But those late night rounds weren't just about de-escalation. They were about connection, practicing curiosity, testing tone, learning when to speak and when to just stop and listen. Turns out Susie had a similar start.
When I first started speaking, I would go out to the jail, and people would always ask, where are you going out there? And I was like, well, first of all, they're a captive audience. And then, it's perfect because there's no cell phones. You don't have to worry about being recorded, and you can kind of just be yourself and make mistakes and figure out who you are as a speaker and a presenter.
You hear that theme, learning how to be yourself through communication in jails, in classrooms, and on stage, or behind a microphone. But here's the thing, communication isn't just public speaking or even speaking at all. It's about listening deeply and fully.
I was talking and I said, I love it when people talk about active listening and then they never explain to you what that is. And everyone just stares. There's multiple forms of listening, and it's so interesting because we just say, well, just, mirror back what they say to you or summarize it and nod your head and make sure you're looking at them. And you can do all of those things and still not have a clue what the other person is saying. And it's funny because I think people often want to assume that we're all on the same page. But the truth is we're rarely on the same page with another person. And there's so much room for just, miscommunication or missing information or all of these other things. But, there's different forms of listening. You have, comprehensive, where you're trying to really see the whole picture and understand the scale of whatever it is that this individual is talking about. And you have, listening to try and understand the specific problem. Like I'm trying to diagnose what's going on and feel, as though I can offer solution or give you some sort of path forward. And then how we do it is so important. And I've asked people this. I said, true active listening is when you are fully present, when you are not thinking about what you have to do for dinner or that to-do list or whatever it is that's coming up tomorrow. And on top of that, you have set all of your values, your beliefs, and your opinions aside for this other person to essentially take up space where you normally take up space internally. And you gotta kind of pause. And then I say, "And how often do we really do that?" Because it's exhausting. That's an exhausting way of living. And we are so centered, not in the way of like being egotistical, but just very much driven by our needs and the things that we must accomplish. But the reality is in certain moments that people need to know that they are taking up space. And it's such a challenge to really demonstrate that back. And when you're doing that, you are going to be nodding your head and leaning in and all of these things, but you're also not going to be comparing your experience to theirs or your values. And you're not going to be thinking, well, that's not how I feel about that particular issue. You're going to set all of that aside. And it asks a lot of us, to be honest. And I can't say that I do that all of the time, but there are moments when something happens and just, within yourself, this person needs me to stop eating, to not look at the watch, to be fully present and just hear them. And in those moments, I think morally, if we don't do it, can you look at yourself the next day in the same way? And also to be given that opportunity where someone allows you to kind of, give them more of your space. I think that it's a beautiful thing, in my opinion, to be able to have that happen.
Think about that for a second. What if prevention started there? Not with a campaign, but with a choice to show up fully, to stop thinking about your response. Instead, hold space for someone else's truth.
In my journey of learning how to build rapport and connect with folks, it kind of happened naturally in my shyness and my unsureness. And I don't come in as the expert and I know, here, let me talk. I want to talk about me, blah, 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 blah. But I just naturally came in curious. And then as I learned motivational interviewing and I started incorporating some of those principles too, I found that it was so much more natural for me, my personality style, to be able to connect when I go into a conversation, just asking questions and reflecting. And some of the things like some of my own internal tips, I guess, pillars would be to ask questions and just find something that individual likes to talk about, they care about, and just ask them about it. You just ask them about it. And this is, my godfather told me this. He's like, if you're talking to a parent and you're wanting to find sort of something to talk about, ask them about their kid. What parent doesn't want to talk about their kid? Ask them that. Ask them. When I was in law enforcement, compliment the dude's car. Doesn't matter how nice it is. Doesn't matter. Find one littlest thing and find a way to give a nice little affirmation. Oh man, did you get a good deal on that thing? There you go. Start asking questions. And yeah. And I know I'm just rambling, but it is so powerful. It is so powerful.
Curiosity opens doors, and Susie takes us deeper into the research, the models, and the why behind how we connect. Like turn of talk, a simple human reflex to respond when someone asks us something, or our social penetration theory. Yes, that's the one from Shrek, the movie. You know what I'm talking about.
So my background is in applied communication. So I've looked at specific models of communication. One is the model of positive communication, which is a framework that pulls in different types of theories to kind of undergird each of the elements. And so it's essentially, how do you build better relationships and how do you demonstrate that you are someone that can connect with others and that they can kind of trust you, right? And that's completely summarized. But there's all of these different aspects of things that we do all the time, like just the back and forth. Just, there's a natural way people connect. And it's called turn of talk, right? So if I ask you a question, naturally you're more likely to respond than not to respond. And of course, there's all of these little things that could happen in between. But so the way that we understand kind of that back and forth, there was a guy named Harvey Sachs who worked in actually call centers. He studied when individuals would call into a call center, kind of the questions that were asked and how they would respond, and was able to kind of understand and almost predict how people would respond based on the types of things that they're asked. So, there's all of these little kind of nuanced pieces within how we interact. And then you have like overarching theories and fields within communication itself, like conflict is one entire space, and conflict management. So, you could look at how companies respond when there's a crisis, or when you're interacting with a person and there's tension, and how do you navigate that? What are some ways of creating pathways forward where everyone's happy? I mean, it goes on and on and on. And so, I've got specialization within conflict and crisis management, so I can do some public relations stuff, but more so within that interpersonal space of maybe your colleague or your friend, or and it's always easier when it's not you. It's easier to kind of prescribe solutions than it is to say, sit down and because, you're the one feeling those things. And then on top of that, research and communications. I've done quite a bit around communication research and looking at how to kind of blend, and for my work, suicide and communication, because in my opinion, suicide prevention falls within the communication space. I mean, we know when someone is having thoughts of suicide, there's a conversation that needs to be had there. And so how do you apply communication research and suicide research in a way that kind of comprehensively addresses those needs? And I have felt for a while that suicide prevention's done a really good job on the suicide side, but communication really hasn't been at the table in that way.
And that's the heart of it. Whether we're talking to someone about substance use, suicide, stigma, or stress, the way we communicate signals you matter, you're safe, and you belong. But we don't always get that right, especially in prevention.
Well, I always say that if there is an issue, it's most likely a communication issue. And I think that that's across anything, organizations or anything like that. And I think in the field, sometimes what I've seen from my experience is that we are speaking for ourselves. And I don't know that that's always the way to go about it. I think that when it comes to the work that we're doing, we need to speak in terms of the people that we're trying to serve. And that might mean doing something or saying something in a way that doesn't feel as natural because we've learned it through this process, or, it's been kind of a part of the field. And, I think communication wise, to just say something and not have anyone even know that you've said it is kind of pointless. And so I think if we're trying to really make a point or do something positive, we first need to really think, is anyone going to pay attention? And it's such a struggle, and I know you understand, people are drawn to the negative. They're drawn to the accidents or the traumas. And when you're trying to put up positivity, you've got so many hurdles just to capture attention. So we really need to do things in a way that's reframed, in my opinion, so that others will first easily understand it instantly, almost instantly, and see themselves in it and see that it's not something that doesn't also apply to them.
So how do we do that? How do we build trust in communities, on teams, across differences? It starts with checking ourselves. What does your email signature say about your values? What's your vacation responder really communicating? Yep, we went there.
I think it's important to have kind of a fluid look on how we do relationships in general. I think sometimes it's very easy to kind of get in these ways of doing things, and especially when you're trying to accomplish tasks and just communicating and emailing. And so I think sometimes having a moment to kind of come back and look at and analyze, like, how am I being perceived, and how am I interacting with others, and am I always interacting in the way that they need in order to see me. One example is I work remotely quite a bit. And so I have relationships with quite a few people where we only communicate through email. And am I always being interpreted in the ways that I want in those emails? And there was a study in, I think it was in New Zealand or Australia, and they actually analyzed professional communication within organizations. And they found that certain types of email communications indicate the workplace culture, and or they all indicate the workplace culture. But in particular, if you're looking at positive culture, individuals who are communicating are actually saying hello and asking a greeting question, and then getting into whatever it is, and then they're ending on positive notes, and it's not simply give me the thing I need, the end. And so I think, for me, one thing that was important was to kind of intentionally look at, this is an element of how I'm perceived in this relationship, even if I'm not speaking with this person very often in person, or, phone calls or Zooms. And is this how I want to interact with them? And does this then create a transactional relationship? And, it's one small sliver of our communication and how we are portrayed, or how we're building relationships and rapport. And yet it's substantial if we talk about like quantity. And so there are times when I don't have time to kind of slow down, but and I have to just ask for the thing and get to the point. But I've been very intentional in taking the time to be personable and let them know that I hope that they had a wonderful weekend, and this thing that you mentioned before, ask about it, and indicate these elements of like just compassion and consideration.
Susie uses vacation responders, yes, those autoresponders, as a tool for connection. She makes them kind, thoughtful, even links to the cause she's supporting or the event she's attending. And you know what? People notice. Because most of us expect transactional communication. But when we get something intentional, it sticks.
I don't know if you and I have had the conversation about vacation responders, but I intentionally use them a lot, and I always indicate, what's going on, but I use them as a tool to actually build relationships. And I get comments on them all the time around the holidays. I will let people know, I hope that they take time to slow down, that the work that they're doing is important. And if they're not well, you can't be doing healthy work. And it's amazing, I think, how much we gravitate to things like that, because I get so many comments. And so I think reflection looks like many different things. It's easy to say, as you're having a conversation with someone, do you reflect on that? But I think when we're talking in terms of communication, we're always communicating. And would you be pleased with all of the dimensions of how you communicate if you had to lay it all out and look at it? And if you're, for me, this is a primary method, I needed to be intentional, especially if I'm someone who's saying that this is important to me. So, I think there are times when we need to kind of step outside of ourselves and do a little planning and be a little intentional prior to interacting. And if you kind of have that as your baseline, if this is how I operate, when you step into conversations with someone who's actually sitting across from you, you're going to see dividends of positive reception. And you're going to see that relationship have a lot more chance to be fostered and healthy, because even on the small things, you're taking the time to do something to show someone else that they are important and that they do matter.
So what if we approach prevention like that? Every touch point, every meeting, every message and post crafted with care, because ultimately prevention is communication.
So I think, if we want more people to become involved and to take it on, I think one, we need more uniform messaging. And quite honestly, it should be very simple, very easy to remember. It should be something that immediately explains whatever it is that we're trying to accomplish. And there's so many social movements where you can pinpoint and say, oh, I know where that phrase is, or I've heard that phrase. One example is the Me Too movement. When I say Me Too, you know exactly what I'm talking about. I don't have to go any further into that conversation with you because you can think in terms of what, kind of the concept, the overarching. And it's the same for many other social movements. Whereas in prevention, what's the phrase? What's the simple phrase? And we often don't have that. We don't have simple, easy to understand, or even memorable messaging that's cohesive across the board. So, I think we should be reevaluating. And I think, too, we have to recognize that there is a virtual aspect now. And the virtual presence of prevention is simply not the same when we look at other types of spaces. What are the colors for substance use prevention if we're talking about, the ribbons, or, when we, and you can name things, breast cancer, what the color ribbon is, autism awareness, all of these elements too. So I think in part because we haven't had the numbers in the work, whether it be informal work or professionalism, but I think too, there's kind of this disparateness to where we're located and how we're coming together. And that needs to change. We need to be more cohesive. We need to have true strategy. We all need to be as on the same page as we can be.
That's the challenge. If we believe prevention is a social movement, then we have to treat it like one. That means messaging, strategy, identity, and visibility. Not just handing the social media account to the youngest person in the office.
Too often I see coalitions, organizations delegate or hand off their social media to the youngest person around because, they're young, they get it. But like, if you're going to give a presentation to city council, do you think y'all would be taking it serious and being very intentional and strategic? And what are you going to say? How do you want it to be perceived? And all the talking points and scripted and all of that. Y'all, your social media is the same thing, only even more. So be just as intentional and strategic and purposeful about it. Don't just pawn it off on the youngest person. They could be good. Yes, no doubt. They understand the inner workings of the platform. Great. But where's that higher level strategy and intentionality behind it? Make sure that is there too. End rant. But
no, absolutely. I mean, I think it's kind of lends back to that conversation around autoresponders of all things. But, I think for some generations, I don't want to tell you how old I am, but for some generations, social media is just social media. And if we're being truly honest, it is a virtual realm of our identities, of the work that we're doing. And it is most definitely another dimension of our communication. And it is a very vital element if we're talking about visibility and true impact at a larger scale. And, there's conversations around, social movements in particular, and the trajectory and the evolution of how social movements now can live both in the real world and online, and what are the repercussions and implications of that.
This episode wasn't just a masterclass in communication. It was a call to remember that everything we do sends a message. So what message are you sending?
How are you communicating? And if you were on the other side of that, are you showing up the way that you want to for other people? And sometimes those are hard looks to take, but I think that they're important. And I think if we really take the time to look at it and reevaluate, we can take control of who we are and how we are seen on the other end by others.
So here's your challenge, friend. Send a more thoughtful email. Ask a better question. Be curious, be intentional, and be human. Because that's where prevention starts, with the person right in front of you. Head to the show notes for links to Susie's previous episode and my website for more tools to deepen your communication skills. And hey, reach out. We'd love to hear how this episode changed how you show up for others. And until next time, take care of yourself, and remember, prevention is better together.
Thank you for listening to the Prevention Leaders Podcast with Dave Closson. Since prevention is better together, make sure you click the subscribe button and share this and other episodes with a friend. If you have a topic idea or guest suggestion, follow us on social media or email us at info@preventionleaders.com.